Thank you for joining me on this webinar on preparing for the rites of Lent and Easter. As we get ready for this beautiful season, we will explore each of the rites that apply to RCIA, and we will talk about them both for the RCIA team as well as liturgists and musicians. Let us begin with a prayer. Lord, Creator and Redeemer of your holy people, your great love has drawn us to seek and to find you. Look upon us today, purify our hearts, and bring fulfillment in us the plan of your grace, so that faithfully following Christ, we may continue to drink the waters of salvation. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. As we begin, let's take a moment to reflect on the rites of Lent as a whole, and why are they so important? Many times it would be easy to say, well, we've got so many things going on in Lent already. Do we really have to do each and every one of these rites? Well, some of them we do, and some of them are optional. But overall, we need to remember that these rites are an important spiritual step for catechumens and candidates, especially during the period of purification and enlightenment when they're getting ready to receive their sacraments. Each of these rites really holds a special place for them. And it's something that they will experience only once in their lives. So I do encourage you to, as much as possible, incorporate these rites with your community and celebrate them with your candidates and catechumens. But let's talk about the effect that they could have for everyone, and first of all for the team. For the team, this is a great way to pray together, to get together before a rite takes place, read through the rite, not just to read it for a rehearsal or to instruct people what to do, but to really read the prayers for ourselves. And how do they relate to us? For example, the prayer that I just used now in the opening is one of the blessings that is for the period of the catechumenate. They do not only need to be restricted at those times, but can really be used at any time. So take some time with the team to pray through the rite of sending or to pray through some of the rite of election so that we gain a deeper knowledge of what it means to them and becomes a prayerful experience for us as a team. It also has an element of community in every one of these rites where the community should be present, or I should say must be present, for all of them. And this is a great help because it keeps us from alienating the RCIA group as its own entity. How many times do we kind of hear that? Oh, that's the RCIA group, or the RCIA group meets over there. And already by talking that way, we're making it seem like that's a whole other part of the church that doesn't relate to the community. And so by having these rites with the community present, sometimes even at different masses, the rite of sending is at the 9:30 and the first scrutiny could be at the 11 o'clock, and then the second scrutiny could be at the 7 a.m. and the third scrutiny could be at the 5 p.m. So having it at different times or whatever you can so that the RCIA group doesn't stay as a group, but instead begins to integrate into the community as they get to know them. And also it allows the community then to take its rightful place in supporting these catechumens and candidates. The rites clearly state that the work of initiation is not the work of just the pastor or the team, but is the work of the community. The community is the one that testifies and gives examples to what parish life is all about. And that's what we want people to enter into. To be fully initiated into a church means to be initiated into the community. We have to remember that we are all the same body of Christ, and we do not separate, but instead find any opportunity we can to bring everyone together. So let's start with the rite of sending. In the rite, number 106, and by the way, all these numbers that I am showing you in this webinar will relate to the rite of Christian initiation of adults, the actual document, and the numbers are of the paragraph number, not the page. So you can follow along in your book and mark it up if you want. If you do not have a copy of the rite book, I do highly suggest that you get one. It is vital to have in order to understand and work through this process. So let's start with number 106. At the conclusion of the period of the catechumenate, a rite of sending of the catechumenates to their election by the bishop offers the local community the opportunity to express its approval of the catechumens and to send them forth. And it actually gives the community a chance to voice their approval, to be present, not only be present for them, but actually voice their approval that they will support them as they continue to in their preparation for the sacraments at Easter. And then at 434, which is the section that talks about the candidates, it says the optional right, so for candidates it's optional, the optional right for parishes whose candidates seeking to complete their Christian initiation will be recognized by the bishop in a subsequent ceremony. So in word about this, so you'll see one is 106 and one is 434, very far apart in the right book. In the right book, there are two sections we're going to be looking at. The section in the front, part 1, talks about your uncatechized and unbaptized members who will be catechumens. But you also many times have baptized members in your RCIA process, baptized in another faith. And rarely, but possible, you might have a baptized Catholic in your process who is completely uncatechized. So the rites are going to be different for each of those categories. So each time I will give you both. So here we're looking at for the rite of sending. In 106, it simply says, at the conclusion of the rite of the period of catechumenate, the rite of sending is held. So that implies, the way that it's written tells us that this isn't optional. You do a rite of sending when you have catechumens period, because they're going to be sent to the rite of election. And I'll talk about exceptions to that in a minute. And 434 talks to us about the candidates, the already baptized. For them, it is optional. So if you're sending them to the bishop, then you include them in the rite of sending. If you don't have candidates, or you have candidates but you're not sending them to the bishop, then you do not have them participate in the rite of sending. Only those that are going to with the bishop are the ones that participate. So the rite of sending is for catechumens and candidates who are going to the rite of election. And if the group is not going to the rite of election, then you don't have a sending. So what are some reasons that a group might not be going to the rite of election and call to continuing conversion? I've already stated one, and that is that for the candidates, it is optional. But a second one might be if you, for example, are in a parish that is very far geographically from where the rite of election will take place, it may be logistically impossible for your catechumens and or candidates to drive out to the rite of election and call to continuing conversion and take part with the whole community. In that case, you can do a rite of election within your parish, but that's only if there's a good reason that you cannot attend, a good logistical reason. So parishes that are very far away from the locations of the rites, especially the weekday rites that are at 7 p.m., that might be a consideration. So if that's something that is happening in your parish, give me a call and we will work through that. For those that are doing the rite of sending, then, the rite of sending does include the Book of Elect for catechumens, and we're going to talk about specifically that book in a few minutes. It can happen at a Sunday or at a weekday mass or at a word celebration. Normally it happens on a Sunday because that's where most of the community is. Remember, the community must be present. So if you are going to have it at a weekday mass or at a word celebration, you need to make sure that the community is represented. So if you have a normal weekday community in the evenings or in the mornings or whatever, and you want to do it there, fine, as long as the community's there. If you're going to have a separate celebration of the word at another time, you must have a community present for that. So it can't just be, them and their sponsors and the team and that's it. The community needs to be a part of this. So with the community. And it should be within 14 days of the rite of election. You don't want to do it too soon, but it does have to happen before you go off to the rite of election. Now, I keep saying just the rite of election, but in fact, in our diocese, it is a combined service for both catechumens and candidates. So it's rite of election and call to continuing conversion. And we'll talk about that difference in just one second. But first, let's focus on the rite of election itself. So 118 tells us the second step in Christian initiation is the liturgical rite called both election and enrollment of names, which closes the period of the catechumenate proper. And remember, the rite of election is for the catechumens. Right now, we're only talking about the unbaptized. 121 tells us the election, marked with a rite of such solemnity, is the focal point of the Church's concern for the catechumens. Admission to the election therefore belongs to the bishop and the presiding celebrant. So really it is the ordinary for the rite of election. The person that should be celebrating is the bishop. which is why we have the 4 different rites of election throughout our diocese. It's only in those occasions where we have a group that it is completely logistically impossible for them to attend, then we can look at other considerations. Otherwise, it really is a rite that all your candidates should be attending with the bishop. So the rite of election is for catechumens who are discerned ready to enter into the next stage of preparation. I do say discerned because it's not an automatic, and it shouldn't be an automatic. Hopefully we're beginning to see the value of having a year-round catechumenate so that we're not pushing people into the rite of election before they're ready. And when I mean ready, I don't mean that they've had exactly 25 classes or anything like that, but that they've had their own conversion experience and they are truly ready to receive the sacraments. That's the subject, though, of another webinar that we'll do another day. But for now, just know that it shouldn't be an automatic that because they reach this time, they automatically jump into the next stage. And it can be combined with the call to continuing conversion, but the election, the rite of election, is only for catechumens. So we'll talk about combinations later. So the rite of election really is not optional. If you look at the way that it's worded in the rite, it specifically says this is what happens. This is what you do. So technically, it is not optional. It does require discernment with the catechumens that they've gone through a conversion of heart and mind, and you can find some of the information on that on number 120 in the Rite Book. And it requires a testimony of the sponsors, and that's listed in 119. So the sponsors need to be present. Now, just a quick word about sponsors. You have 2 options. Many parishes will have parish sponsors, people of the parish who agree to walk with the catechumens and candidates through the process, occasionally attend class with them, keep up with them, talk to them, maybe go to the same Mass on Sunday so they see them, kind of get to know them, and then they can introduce them into the parish. This does not take the place of the godparent. People might say, well, I already chosen my godparent. Well, your godparent then at the rite of election is really the one that should be present with you. But we may know that they may not always be possible. They may not always be able to come if they live far away. So the sponsor, parish sponsor, comes in handy then, because then they can step in and be with them at this rite of election if needed. So if the godparents that the candidate and catechumen have chosen are parishioners already, or they live locally, then they can be the sponsor all the way through. But for those people who don't have someone in the parish, it's nice to pair them up with someone. Once again, topic for another webinar, but it's something to think about. But either way, a sponsor or godparent needs to be with them at the rite of election, present. And then during the rite of election, there's actually one place in there, and I keep forgetting to note the number there, that the bishop actually calls them elect of God. And this is when their name changes from being catechumens to now we're going to call them the elect. During purification and enlightenment, they're called the elect. So the book of the elect is for them, and it is for them to sign their names, which is why we call it the enrollment of names. It is for them to sign their names in this book as those who will be going forth for the sacraments at Easter. And really the preference is the signature. It can be one person can put all the names in to make it look pretty, but honestly, that's not what this is for. The whole thing is that image, that symbol of them signing their names in the book. Now, over the last couple of years with the pandemic, there have been changes, and some parishes may have gone to somebody writing all the names in for safety because we weren't gathering in person, and so that could have been an option then. But if we're able to be in person with them, then they really should sign their names. So when should they sign their names? There's 2 things you can do. One, they could sign their names during the rite of sending. So if you only have 5, 6, even 10 catechumens, you could have the book up on a nice podium or a table with a pen next to it, play some nice music, and during Mass they can sign the book. Or, during the rite, they could sign the book, or before the rite, before Mass starts as a prelude, they can sign the book. If you have a lot of them, if you have like 15 or 20 or even more, you may want to have them do it another time. What I would do sometimes if I had big numbers is I would have them come half an hour before Mass or 45 minutes before Mass, and we would meet in the little chapel, and we would play soft music, and I explained to them what the book is. We'd say a prayer, and then they'd sign there with their sponsors having their hand on their shoulders. They would come forward and sign, and then we would process from the little chapel over to the church with holding the book up, and then bring them in with the book. So we kind of did our own little ceremony. So you can do things like that, be a little bit creative, but help them to make that signing the book an important piece. So if possible, their name should be called as they're signing, or you can do it as they're presenting. If they're not signing in person and you're going to walk into the church with the book, someone holding up the book high, open to that page so that people can see, then have someone at the podium up in front with the music playing softly, simply saying the names as the person is processing up with the book. Something like that, because the whole idea of names is what's important in this book. Our name is who we are. And our signature nowadays is a little different, but at one time our signature represented us. Now that we have electronic signatures and stuff, it may be thought of differently, but before, you know, your signature represented you, your assent. I am signing this, and it meant something. And so in this case, it does. It means something. And we may have to explain that, especially if we have young people or children that do not understand the significance of signature, but that's something that you can definitely do, and it's a great experience. The symbol is a name. We talked about that. And remember, this is only for the catechumens to sign. Some people will call me and say, but our candidates feel left out. Well, we need to remember to explain to our candidates that because the catechumens have things differently, is because they're not baptized. And our candidates are baptized. So they already are part of the family. They already are part of the elect. They already were chosen by virtue of their baptism. So they don't need to sign the book. They are not elect. They have a whole different role. And we'll talk about them again in a minute. So there you go again. The baptized are elect already by virtue of their baptism. So for them who are already baptized, we have for them a similar rite, which is called the rite of calling candidates to continuing conversion. And that is because they have already been converted, so to speak. They've already had their moments of conversion towards the faith at one point or another, and because they are already Catholics, they do not need to convert. They are already converted by their baptism. Many times we use the word convert. We call them a convert when they are of another Christian faith and becoming Catholic. And in actuality, that's a misuse of the term. In actuality, converts are those who are going from non-belief to belief. Baptized Catholics already believe. They're already Christian. So they do not need to convert. They are not converts. They are already Christian and therefore are already part of the faith with us. So this rite is saying to them, we know you've already gone through your period of conversion and you are Christian already. So now we're calling you to continue to do that in your life now that you will fully be initiated into the church. So this rite is for candidates who are discerned ready to complete their initiation of the Catholic faith, and it is an equivalent to the rite of election for candidates. So the wording is different for them because they are already baptized, and it states that in the rite. So the wording is going to be different. By virtue of their baptism, they're already elect, and again, the role of the sponsor and the community are vitally important, just like the rite of election. The only difference is in the wording because they are already baptized. And they do not sign the book. And I know some people that have asked, can we have a book of the candidates then so they don't feel so left out? I mean, you could, but it kind of misses out on the symbolism of what it means for the elect. So try not to make everything equal because they're not equal. The candidates are already baptized, and we need to honor their baptism and remind them that they are honored. It's not that they're being left out of things, it's that they're already part of the community in some element by their baptism. Now, for those of you who might think that, oh, the catechumens get everything and the candidates don't get anything. Well, there actually is an optional rite specifically for the candidates during Lent, and that is a penitential rite. Because they're already baptized, this is something a little different. So 459 tells us, this penitential rite can serve to mark the Lenten purification of the baptized but previously uncatechized adults, your candidates, within the celebration of the word, similar to the scrutiny for the catechumens. And 462 says, this penitential rite may be celebrated on the second Sunday of Lent or on a Lenten weekday. So those of you who have been part of this process for a long time know, third Sunday of Lent, we start the scrutinies, and we have 3 scrutinies for the adults. Well, you can do this on the second Sunday of Lent before the scrutiny, so you give the candidates their own moment of purification and reconciliation, and they have just these moments of prayer, and the same type of thing. It's basically like a scrutiny. Again, the wording is changed so it's appropriate for a baptized person. So you could do this on the second Sunday of Lent or any Lenten weekday. If you have your sessions on Wednesday nights and you have an evening mass at 6 p.m. and your sessions start at 6:30 or at 7, then have it at a weekday mass. Something that you can do for them. So this is an optional rite. This is not mandatory, which is why a lot of people just kind of skip over it and don't see it in the book because it's in the section for the candidates. But it really is a nice thing that we can do, and we can help the candidates with their purpose. It's also a nice way to prepare them for not to prepare for the sacrament, but to get them ready and a prayerful time, and then they can receive the sacrament of reconciliation maybe the following week or something like that. So you can integrate it all kinds of ways. It's a great rite. Again, it's often overlooked. It's useful, especially when there's no catechumens in the parish. That question has come up. If we don't have catechumens, do we do the scrutinies? No. But then the community also misses out on that event that happens on Sundays. So if that's the case, if you don't have catechumens, you can actually do this penitential rite anytime on any Sunday during Lent and use this instead. And you don't have to change readings to reading A or anything like that. You can just use this rite for your candidates, and then the community can also be involved. Or you can do it in addition to the scrutinies, as I said before that. There is no combined rite, though, so make sure you know that. You cannot do the penitential rite and the scrutiny on the same day. I would not advise that. That's just too heavy. It's too much. It really should be separate and distinct. So let's look a little bit about the scrutinies really quick. So 141 says the scrutinies, which are solemnly celebrated on Sundays, are meant to uncover, then heal all that is weak, defective, or sinful in the hearts of the elect, and bring out, then strengthen, all that is upright, strong, and good. If you've ever wanted to know why we do the scrutinies, here it is. Because as they're preparing to be baptized, we want to help them uncover anything that is weak or defective in them or sinful, so that in the baptismal waters they can be washed clean. That's how I explain it to them. These are the 3 weeks we're going to reflect on sinfulness in our lives, so that when you go into the waters, you can ask the Lord to take them away from you, and then you come out clean. It's kind of like almost an examination of conscience divided into 3 Sundays, where we're just going to look at, using the three Gospels, how those tie into our lives of sin. And 143 tells us, in order to inspire the elect a desire for purification and redemption by Christ. So it's celebrated at a regular Sunday liturgy on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Sundays of Lent. That is just when they are done. All 3 should be celebrated except with children, where there's only 1 scrutiny for children. But for adults, they need to have all 3. And you do use the Cycle A lectionary readings, and that is important because all the prayers and all the reflection and everything connects directly with those Cycle A readings. And I'll get to that in a minute. And then the candidates can have a role in praying with them. So if you have them in one location, standing or kneeling with their sponsor, with their hand on a shoulder, maybe you can pair up a candidate with them, and the candidate can have a hand on the other shoulder, or can stand a few steps back and just have their hand, kind of raised in prayer for them while the sponsors are praying. So the candidates can have a role. They have the role, or they can simply have the role of the assembly. We can just say to them, just like the rest of the assembly, because you baptized, you're already part of this assembly, just like the rest of the assembly, this is your role. But they still need to understand what it is. And then the assembly is called to also reflect on their own sinfulness and what they would like to, be renewed at Easter. So a quick word on the Cycle A lectionary readings. That question I always get as well. Do we have to use those readings? And I'll say it this way. The scrutinies are meant to be used with the Cycle A readings. And the reason is because we have kind of a growing understanding and learning about sinfulness and reflection as we go through. So you have the first one, which is the Samaritan woman at the well, which reflects really on personal sin, on her sinfulness, recognizing that she was sinful, but yet Christ was there with her. And the symbol of the living water that the water of eternal life that she is given, and that is what they will receive at baptism, that water of eternal life. And so that whole connection comes into play at a very personal level. The second one with the man born blind, you can kind of extend it, because with the man born blind, we're talking more about the sin around him. Because immediately, what do the Pharisees say when they see him? Was it his sin or his family's sin or his parents' sin that made him blind? And then we go into the whole concept of who are the people that are truly seeing? Who can truly see Christ? Who can truly see what it means to follow Christ? And really, in that story, it's the blind man. So there's that whole element that goes with that blind man story. And then finally, the rising of Lazarus, where we look at everlasting life in a completely different way, that image of dying and then rising again, which is what they will do in baptism, go down into the waters, metaphorically, go down into the waters and then come back up, a new creation. And so rising like Lazarus and overcoming anything that keeps us in that cave of not being able to get close to God. So there's a lot of imagery in those Cycle A readings, which is why they are what is prescribed for the Sundays of the scrutinies. Some parishes will have the Cycle A readings only at the Mass where the scrutiny takes place. I've heard other people, they'll use Cycle A readings for all the Masses, but whatever you do, it really should be those readings where you're celebrating the scrutinies. Oops, there's everything I just talked about. The readings then instruct us gradually about the mystery of sin. We learn about it through the three images. Then we have the exorcism, which please explain to them well before, what this exorcism here in this case means. What it means is it's that prayer to free them up from that sinfulness that we just talked about, to heal them from the weakness. It's not about drawing the devil out of them like we see on TV, or that we might, that is practiced in other ways with evil and demons and such inside a person. That's a whole other element of our faith. Here, when we're talking about exorcism in this case, we're talking about helping to bring them out of the effects of sin. We're trying to take away the influence of evil so that they can receive strength in the community. So that's in 144. Really try to explain that to them, or have someone come in and explain that to them if you don't feel that you can do that well, because that really needs to be clear to them what exorcism is about. The scrutinies are to be celebrated in sequence. Don't take them out of sequence. Samaritan woman at the well, man born blind, Lazarus. They got to be in order. The use of music and ambiance is key. This is one of the areas where I really feel you need to bring in your liturgical musicians. Please don't go to them 2 days before the scrutiny and say, oh, by the way, we have scrutiny, here's a script. That's just really not respecting their place and their role as musicians and liturgists in your community. So please meet with them. This is now the time. We're in February right now when I'm doing this. Meet with them now in February before Ash Wednesday and say, hey, these are some of the things we're going to do. Here are the dates we're going to do them. And here's kind of the theme and what they're about, so that your musicians can pick music that goes with the actual service, that kind of helps you with that. If you're in need of that, or if you're you are a musician and you'd like some ideas and some samples, give me a call. I'd be happy to do that with you. I have a book that kind of gives suggestions. Unfortunately, I believe it's out of print, but it's a great book that takes each of these RCIA rites and gives you suggestions of music, whether it's English, bilingual, with children, and then I have many more. There are ways to integrate music that is already familiar to your community. You don't need to learn all new music for these occasions. There's music that you can simply do with that you know already, and it works really well. For example, the scrutiny of the Samaritan woman at the well, any song that refers to water in terms of baptism and cleansing is great. Wade in the water, the spiritual, is a great one. Come to the water is a great one. Rain down is a great one. So anything that talks about God's love and that image of water washing us clean is appropriate. So you take each of these kind of ideas and work with that. So please meet with your musicians ahead of time so they can really help to enhance these moments of scrutinies. And then we have the presentations, which often are done in combination with the scrutinies. Don't have to be, but they traditionally are. And they're kind of misunderstood in how we do them and what the purpose is. So 147 tells us that the presentations take place after the celebration of the scrutinies, unless for pastoral reasons they have been anticipated during the period of the catechumenate. So let's say one of my parishes, for example, it was a huge parish, and we had so many masses that were like right on top of each other, within an hour and a half of the next, that sometimes if we did, for example, a scrutiny and we had a lot of catechumens and it just took a long time, it would throw the whole schedule of the parish off. I mean, of the whole parish mass schedule would get thrown off. So we had to be a little bit creative in how we integrated these things, and sometimes it just wasn't time to do another thing. Or there may be other pastoral reasons why you just don't want to do these presentations, or you're not able to do the presentations with the scrutinies. Then you can, as it says, you can anticipate them during the catechumenate and do them maybe a couple of weeks before Lent, or you can also do them on Holy Saturday, which we'll talk about at the end of this presentation today. But otherwise, they're usually done after the scrutinies. So it could be during the week of the scrutiny, or it could be on that same day in combination with. So when the catechetical formation of the elect is completed, the Church lovingly entrusts to them the Creed and the Lord's Prayer to enlighten them. Remember, this is their time of purification and enlightenment in Lent. So it can be done after the scrutiny before they're dismissed. You can do it right then and there, bring them up forward. Here we're doing this presentation, and then you dismiss them as normal. You can do that. You can also do it during the week at a weekday mass as long as you have community present. So again, if you have your sessions are on a Wednesday and you have a mass that's either right before or right when your class starts, you may just want to do it instead of having our regular session. We're going to all meet at mass first, and then we'll walk over and sit and talk about it. So it can be done that way as well. It really should happen at some point with the children. With the children, you may want to think, especially with your numbers, pastorally, you figure out how best to do it, as long as the children understand that there's significance to this and you have some community present. One year what I did was, I think I did for scrutiny too for children, because we had so many. I had one year it was insane. I had 19 adults or 17 adults, and I had 24 children. And to do all of this at one mass, the children, it was just, they were restless. We did it for the rite of acceptance, and then we did it for the rite of sending. And it was just really hard on the little ones because there were just so many people up on the altar with them. And so that year what I did was I did it on a weekday mass. But to ensure that we had community there, I went to one of our prayer groups and I asked them, they had a 40 people in their prayer group, and I said, hey, would you please come to this event for our children and bring, whoever you want, bring family, bring friends, whoever. I need community present, and I'd like you to be that for them, just to be present for them so they're not in a huge mass, but that there is community represented. And they did, and it was very nice. They mixed in with the small weekday mass crowd and then the parents, and it made for a nice little crowd for them that wasn't overbearing, but they still got the sense of community being with them. So figure out a way then that works best for you for children. For pastoral reasons and sometimes time constraints, the pastoral reasons that we talk about might be, again, time constraints, or also for greater emphasis, so not to be outshined. So if you want to do something really nice for the presentations, you don't want to outshine the scrutinies. So you may want to, do them at a different time. That's perfectly fine. One thing about the presentations and the way that they're done, a lot of times when I first started in RCIA, and maybe some of you are still doing this, and if you are, that's okay. What we kind of did was we just put them up front, and then we handed them the scroll that had the Creed or the Our Father written out nicely, and then we just said the Creed together, and that was about it. And that was okay, but I learned somewhere, I think it was on one of the events I went to with Team RCIA, where they modeled doing this in a different way, where they would, yes, it was with Team RCIA, so they would have the candidates and catechumens stand in the front and face the people. The people will stand, and instead of just running through the creed like normal and the candidates and catechumens stand there listening or following on a piece of paper, they were there to listen, and we instructed them to this before. To receive these prayers is to truly listen to them. And so what they did was they had the community say the prayer very slowly and instruct the community before Mass started, and then right before they said it, that they were going to do this. So simple way would be to say, together we're going to present the Creed to our brothers and sisters here in front, and we're going to do it by praying it reflectively. So please, if you'd like to use your missal, but we are going to pause after each statement or after each line. So an example would be, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And you go through the whole creed or the whole Our Father in that way, with a breath in between. Because what happens when we pray these prayers? We often start and we go. We're off running. It's like the bell at the horse race. Father will start, I believe, and we all just jump in and run. And sometimes we even forget what we're saying, or it just becomes the norm. It's like driving to work. You just do it on autopilot and you go. And sometimes we forget the meanings of those words ourselves. And so this is a nice way for the candidates and the catechumens to hear it. It's presented to them in word, and they hear it, but they're hearing it in a very prayerful and reflective manner. It's just one of the ideas that you might be able to integrate. There are many more that you could do. If you're doing something creative with this in a way that is meaningful, that's great, that's wonderful, and if you feel like sharing it, please share it and we'll share it with everyone else. But basically the whole concept is that they've received the prayer and it becomes a part of them. It's the community gifting it to them, so it becomes a part of them in their hearts. So let's talk about these preparation rites for Holy Saturday. Again, something that's often skipped over in the busyness of everything, and I can completely understand that. I've had experiences with parishes where they just do a simple prayer in the morning. I've had experiences with parishes where they actually do a whole retreat on Holy Saturday morning from like 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. and then everyone goes home, rests, has dinner, and comes back for the vigil. And it's just amazing experience. It sounds like a lot of work, and it is, but it's amazing. So 185.1 tells us that the elect are to be advised that on Holy Saturday they should refrain from their usual activities, spend their time in prayer and reflection, and as far as they can, observe a fast. This is something when I was in the parish, I always did. I always told them for the Triduum, don't leave all of the preparations for Holy Saturday until that weekend. Do them the week before. And when I talk about preparations that can distract you from prayer, I mean buying the new shoes and getting your hair done and getting your nails done and all those things. Okay, maybe you might need to have your hair done, early Saturday morning or Friday afternoon or whatever. But if you don't, if you're going to have your hair cut and colored and whatever, do it beforehand. If you're going to need to buy new shoes, do it beforehand so that once Holy Thursday begins in the evening, you have that whole time for prayer and reflection. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be in prayer the whole time, but that you're not doing activities that are going to take you out of a prayerful mode or thinking about it. So can I have a party, and celebrate have dinner with my family before we go to the vigil? Sure. Can I, do activities like, with my family, like going to church and then going out to lunch or whatever? Sure. But just try not to do usual things, like I said, going to the market, getting the cake and all that. Ask somebody else to do that for you if you're going to celebrate the sacraments later. The elect and the candidates should be focused at this time during the Triduum, and especially Holy Saturday morning, if that's when they're receiving their sacraments, in prayer and reflection. And if they can, fasting, but tell them not to fast so much that they faint at the Easter Vigil. 185.2 tells us when it's possible to bring the elect together on Holy Saturday for reflection and prayer, to do that. And you can celebrate several of the optional rites that are available in the book, and it's great. You can celebrate the presentation of the Lord's Prayer if you haven't done it, and you can have them recite the creed, have them start to memorize the creed before it's presented to them, so when they hear it, they kind of already know it, and then after that, they can start praying with everybody, and at your Holy Saturday, you can recite it all together, stand and at the beginning or the end, whatever, but that's a beautiful, beautiful thing to do. The Ephepheta rite, I can never say that correctly, is a beautiful one as well, and that's in the book, in the Holy Saturday rites. Something you can do during the purification enlightenment time if you have time for it, but you could also do it on this Holy Saturday preparation rite. It's great. It's a great thing to do on that day. And then choosing the baptismal names if you'd like to do that. So if they don't have a baptismal name, they don't have a saint name or a reflective name, and they want to choose a different name for their baptism, they can do that, but that's optional. So all of that is in the right book. You can look at them and decide, hey, maybe we're going to do something Holy Saturday morning, just a brief, what I did at one of my parishes was we had a rehearsal on Holy Saturday morning, and so we met at 8:30 with the community, and instead of having morning mass, we had the morning prayer from Liturgy of the Hours, and we did that bilingually. And so that, because it was bilingual and we had music and everything together, it took about 20 minutes, half an hour. But there's no mass on Holy Saturday morning. So we did that with them, and then the community would leave, and then we'd spend some time doing one or two of these rites with them in the church. And then we would talk to them about kind of walking them through what's going to happen in the evening and where they needed to go. I'm not really a proponent that you have to rehearse every element with your elect and candidates, because we also want them to have that element of experiencing everything and not worrying about, oh wait, they said that word, so what do I have to listen to till I get up and walk over there. I prefer to rehearse the godparents and make it the godparents' responsibility to learn what they have to do and where to go, and then they help the elect and candidates to walk through this whole thing, rather than being on top of them for rather than themselves having to worry about everything. I want them to come and just be at the liturgy and to just be in the experience of their sacraments and not worry about the other stuff. So also Holy Saturday, 207. The usual time for celebration of sacraments of initiation is the Easter Vigil, especially for your catechumens. This is really the time, I'm sorry, for your elect. For your elect, Easter Vigil is the baptismal Mass, is when you really do that. For your candidates can receive their sacraments as long as they've gone through RCIA, can receive First Communion and Confirmation any Sunday during the Easter season. So many times we will separate that, and a lot of times that has to do with number, because if you have a huge group, your Mass can go on till past midnight. So, and I know what I speak, because as I said, that big group we had of like 17 adults and 24 children, that was such a very long liturgy, and it was beautiful, but I had children in there, and the children, it was just so difficult for them to stay awake. So you may want to pastorally look at this and consider what you're going to do. But for those being fully initiated, that happens at the Easter Vigil. For the others, it could happen in any Sunday in the Easter season. But 208 also reminds us that we don't only have to wait for Holy Saturday. If, for example, you get to the rite of sending, the rite of election, and you have someone that's just not ready, they themselves feel they're not ready to move forward yet, that doesn't mean they have to wait a full year to then enter rite of election. If then 3 months later, they have an amazing conversion experience and you talk them through this and you realize, wow, they really have had that eye awakening moment, and now they feel ready and they're excited. You're not going to say, okay, come back next March and we'll look at it. Then you can actually prepare them to receive their sacraments at any time. So 208 tells us when the celebration takes place outside the usual time in these extreme circumstances, care should be taken to ensure that it has a markedly paschal character. So basically we want to create a similar ambiance as we have with Lent into Easter. So you would still have a rite of election for them at the parish. You would still have them enter the time of purification and enlightenment. If possible, you would still do the scrutinies with them, and then they would receive their sacraments on a Sunday that you choose for them. So it is still possible to do it outside of the actual Easter Vigil cycle if needed. That's not the norm. It's not like, oh, let's plan 2 times during the year when we do this every year. No, it's only as need be. So if need comes up, it is perfectly fine to do that. A final word just on mystagogy. I know it's not really a rite, but it always gets kind of put aside and ignored, and for good reason. I think we all have the occasions of either saying ourselves or hearing others say, well, we have it, but nobody ever comes. And I know it's difficult. I've been in that position as well. So just a few words on what mystagogy is and how we can prepare. So 244 tells us this is a time for the community and the neophytes, the newly baptized, together to grow in deepening their grasp of the Paschal mystery and in making it a part of their lives through meditation on the gospel, sharing in the Eucharist, and doing works of charity. So basically, it's a time that we work with them to integrate them into the community. We make sure that they have a place in the community, so they're not just like, okay, you got your sacraments, you're done, bye, and then suddenly they don't know anybody and they don't know where to go. Hopefully along the way in the process you've been introducing them to people of the parish and they've been able to start joining in that way, but if not, then this is the time to really look at, now how are you going to live this out? How are you going to learn how to meditate on the gospel and do works of charity and live your faith now that you're not coming to sessions every week and meeting with us and we're telling you what to do? So through it, 246 says, now through it, the neophytes, with the help of their godparents, should experience a full and joyful welcome into the community and enter into closer ties with the faithful. I think of when I was starting out in RCIA and even up to probably my ending years at the last parish I was at almost 10 years ago, we had this kind of idea that during Mystagogy, what we did was every week we brought in ministers of the pair, like leaders of ministries, so that they could introduce their ministry and then say, okay, now would you like to join? And ideally, in the mind, it's a nice idea. It's a good idea. It's almost having their own little ministry fair. They can meet people. But I had some feedback from some of the catechumens late, or the neophytes later, saying it kind of felt like, we were being rushed, like you have to pick one. And that's not what we want either. And so rather than doing that, my suggestion during mystagogy is like take the time to really talk them through. Your first session should be, let's talk through what happened at Easter. Let's look at it and use the mystagogical questions out there. What did you feel? What did you see? What stuck with you? What remains in your mind that makes you feel like that made it special for you? Or what sounds out of your mind because you didn't understand it. I don't remember that at rehearsal. Why do we do this? Those types of things. Spend a lot of time with them with that. And then ask them, now, what does that make you feel? How do you see being Catholic now? How does this change your experience? Or how do you think this is going to change you going forward? What does this have to say to you about the church and about God, about God's presence in your life? Has that changed for you? So really talk them through some of the things that maybe they're roaming in their heads, but they're not really knowing how to verbalize yet. So work with them on that. And if their sponsors and their godparents are able to be there with them, all the better, because then they can have someone to talk with. Um, if you do want to introduce them to ministries of the parish, then I would suggest you do it this way. During the catechumenate, when you're talking about the Eucharist, invite a Eucharistic minister to come in and share what it feels like to be an instrument of providing the Eucharist to the people of God. When you're talking about Scripture, bring in a lector who can then talk about the experience and what it means to them to share, to proclaim God's word to the community. So to work that way, when you're talking about social justice, bring in the person in charge of your food program for the poor, or the person who serves the homeless, or who visits people in jails. Bring them in during your catechumenate, mixing it in with your catechetical topic, and that kind of gets them to meet the people, get to know the ministry, and see how it connects to our life as Christians, as our to our faith. And then at this point in the mystagogy, we can go back to that and say, okay, now that you are, fully initiated into the church, if you'd like to take on a ministry, let's remember, here's phone numbers or emails of the people you met in the last year or so. Here's the number of Susan, who is the person who came to talk about Eucharist, and here's the number of Fred, who came and talked to us about Lector, and do it in that way. So you're kind of taking them back, you're introducing them slowly. That's what this period is, to introduce them to the community, to get them to mix in. You don't have to have a mystagogy session every week. Maybe one week we're going to have a mystagogy session to talk about the Easter Vigil, and then the next week there is a group that's having a big breakfast in the hall. And so, what we're going to do? We're going to all go to Mass, and then we're going to all go eat breakfast in the hall and, support this ministry and then chit-chat over our meal. So you can be creative with this. And by being creative with it and helping them to see the importance of it, they'll want to come back. You can also use this mystagogical technique all through purification and enlightenment. That's what I do. After the rite of election, we meet again and I say, okay, let's take 15 minutes. Rite of election last Sunday or last Wednesday. What did you feel? What did you see? What did you hear? What do you remember from there? Tell me what you remember. Let's talk it through. Now, what do you think it means? Now, what do you think the symbolism was? So you start doing these little things and you call it mystagogical reflection. So that when you talk about after Easter will be our time to do this type of mystagogical reflection on what it means to be a Catholic, then they understand, oh, it's not just a class, we're just kind of getting together to talk. So be a little creative. And if you want more help with mystagogy, let's talk, another webinar.